The rattling of the stage coach wheels against the muddy road came to a halt as lightning split the sky over Willow Creek. Katherine Vance clutched her sodden shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching raindrops cascade from the brim of her bonnet. It was April 1876, and the spring storms had turned the Montana Territory into a mire of mud and misery. "Last stop, miss," the driver called down. "Willow Creek." Katherine stepped down into ankle-deep mud, her traveling bag clutched to her chest. The few possessions she'd managed to grab when her father had ordered her from their home in Boston were now all she had in the world. She glanced up at the small frontier town that was supposed to be her salvation, where her aunt had promised her shelter after Katherine had refused to marry the wealthy banker. Her father had chosen a man 30 years her senior, with wandering hands and 3 deceased wives. But the letter that awaited her at the town's small post office crushed what little hope remained in her heart. "I'm sorry, miss," the postmaster said, genuine sympathy in his weathered face. "Your aunt passed 2 weeks ago. Influenza took her quick like." Katherine stood frozen, the letter confirming her aunt's death trembling in her hand. Is there anyone else who might have known her, someone who could help me?" The postmaster shook his head. "Your aunt kept mostly to herself. Her property's been seized by the bank for debts." "I'm afraid there's nothing left." With nowhere to go and the rain falling harder, Katherine found herself outside the town's only hotel. The rate posted on the door would exhaust her meager savings in less than a week. Lightning illuminated the town's single street as she stood there, rain plastering her traveling dress to her skin. She had no family, no friends, no prospects. At 22, she was utterly alone. "You looking for a room, miss?" The hotel proprietor eyed her suspiciously from the doorway, taking in her bedraggled appearance. "Yes, please," Katherine said, fumbling with her small coin purse. The man's expression hardened as he noticed her Boston accent. "We don't take charity cases." "Rooms are $2 a night, paid in advance." Katherine counted her money with trembling fingers. "I can pay for 3 nights. And then what?" the man snorted. "Listen, we don't need any more desperate women turning to unsavory occupations in this town. Sheriff's working hard to clean this place up." "I would never," Katherine began, outraged. "That's what they all say." He started to close the door. "Try the saloon, they might have worked for your kind." The door slammed in her face, leaving her alone in the downpour. Thunder rumbled overhead as Katherine stumbled away, her legs weak with exhaustion and hunger. The last proper meal she'd had was on the train 2 days ago. She made her way to the small church at the edge of town, hoping to find sanctuary, but the doors were locked tight. Slumping onto the church steps, partially sheltered by the small overhang, Katherine allowed herself to weep for the first time since leaving Boston. "You'll catch your death out here." Katherine startled at the deep voice, looking up to see a tall man on horseback, water streaming from the brim of his Stetson. In the dim light, she could make out broad shoulders beneath a heavy duster and a face shadowed by several days' growth of beard. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted, too exhausted and defeated to maintain pretenses. The man dismounted, leading his horse closer. When lightning flashed again, Katherine saw kind eyes studying her with concern rather than judgment. "Name's Henry Forrester," he said, tipping his hat. "Got a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Katherine Vance," she replied, her voice barely audible above the rain. "What brings you to Willow Creek, Miss Vance? Not exactly a destination for proper Eastern ladies." Katherine hesitated, then decided the truth couldn't make her situation any worse. "My family disowned me for refusing an arranged marriage. My aunt lived here, but she died before I arrived. The hotel won't take me, assuming I'm some sort of fallen woman." Henry's expression darkened. "Thompson at the hotel, man's a self-righteous hypocrite." He fell silent, studying her for a long moment while rain continued to pour around them. "I've got a spare room," he finally said. "Nothing fancy, but it's dry." Katherine stiffened. "I couldn't possibly, no strings attached." Henry said firmly, understanding her concern. "I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, proper as they come. She'll vouch for me. I just can't leave you sitting in the rain like this." Katherine hesitated, weighing her options. Trust a stranger or spend the night in the rain, possibly dying of exposure. "I don't know you, Mr. Forrester." "No, you don't," he agreed, "but I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." He extended his hand. "I promise you'll be safe. If you're uncomfortable once we reach the ranch, Mrs. Wilkins can take you to her sister's place in the morning." Something in his steady gaze compelled Katherine to believe him. She took his offered hand and let him help her to her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. Henry lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold tight," he instructed, one arm securing her as he turned the horse toward the outskirts of town. They rode in silence through the storm, Katherine's exhaustion eventually overcoming her propriety as she leaned back against the solid warmth of his chest. By the time they reached the ranch, she was barely conscious. She vaguely registered being carried inside a modest but well-built house, a concerned older woman fussing around them, and finally being laid on a soft bed. As she drifted into sleep, Katherine heard Henry's voice through the haze of exhaustion. "Her family threw her out in the rain," he explained to someone, "left her with nowhere to go." "Poor child," came a woman's voice, Mrs. Wilkins, Katherine presumed. "She can stay as long as she needs," Henry said firmly. Katherine's last conscious thought was wondering what kind of man would show such kindness to a complete stranger. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through curtains Katherine didn't recognize. For a moment she was disoriented, then memories of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up quickly, discovering she was wearing a simple cotton nightgown that wasn't her own. A knock at the door made her pull the quilt up to her chin. "Yes." A stout, gray-haired woman entered, carrying a tray. "Good morning, Miss Vance. I'm Mrs. Wilkins. I hope you don't mind, but I changed you out of those wet clothes last night. They're drying on the line." "Thank you," Katherine said, relaxing slightly. "Mr. Forrester." "Is out seeing to the cattle," Mrs. Wilkins replied, setting the tray beside Katherine. "He asked me to tell you to take your time. There's no rush for you to decide what you want to do next." Katherine nodded, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Wilkins poured. "He's very kind." "That he is, Mrs. Wilkins agreed, her face softening. "Too kind for his own good sometimes. Been on his own since he was 16. Built this place from nothing." Curiosity sparked within Katherine. "Has he no family?" "None living. Parents died of cholera when he was young. Raised by his grandfather until the old man passed." Mrs. Wilkins busied herself straightening the room. "Now eat up. Nothing helps clear the mind like a full stomach." After breakfast, Katherine found her dress and undergarments cleaned and pressed. Once dressed, she ventured out to explore her temporary sanctuary. The Forrester Ranch was modest compared to the grand estates she'd known in Boston, but there was something honest about it that appealed to her immediately. The main house was solidly built of logs with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and beyond them, rolling grasslands stretched toward distant mountains. Katherine stepped onto the porch, breathing in the fresh air. The storm had cleared, leaving behind a perfect spring day. In the distance, she could see figures on horseback moving among a herd of cattle. "Feel better after some sleep," Henry's voice startled her. He approached from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. In daylight, Katherine could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling blue against his weathered face, and when he smiled, unexpected dimples appeared in his cheeks. "Much better, thank you," she replied, suddenly self-conscious. "Mr. Forrester, I can't thank you enough for your kindness, but I shouldn't impose. It's no imposition," he interrupted. "And please call me Henry." "Henry," she repeated, finding the informality strange but not unwelcome. "I need to find work, somewhere to live. I can't stay here indefinitely." He leaned against the porch railing, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "What skills do you have, Miss Vance? Catherine, please," she offered, returning his courtesy. "I was educated at Miss Porter's school for young ladies. I can play the pianoforte, speak French and Italian, paint watercolors, and embroider." Henry's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement. "Not much call for any of that around here, I'm afraid." Catherine's shoulders slumped. "I suspected as much. Can you read and write well?" "Yes, of course. Cipher, keep accounts," she nodded. "My father insisted I understand basic accounting, even though he considered it unladylike." Henry seemed to consider something. "The school teacher in Willow Creek left last month, married a miner from over in Helena. Town's been looking for a replacement." Hope bloomed in Catherine's chest. "Do you think they would consider me? Worth asking," Henry said. "I'm on the town council. I can put in a good word." "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked, genuinely puzzled by his continued kindness. Henry was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains. "When I first came to this territory, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a borrowed horse. An old rancher gave me a chance when no one else would." He looked back at her. "Sometimes all a person needs is a chance. And if I don't get the position, then we'll figure something else out," he said simply, as if helping her was the most natural thing in the world. "In the meantime, you're welcome here." "I can't just stay without contributing," Catherine insisted. "I was raised to pay my own way." Henry considered this. "Mrs. Wilkins could use help with the household. She's not as young as she used to be, and this place keeps growing." "I don't know much about keeping a ranch house," Catherine admitted. "You can learn," he said confidently, "and you can help with the accounts." "I'm not much for paperwork, and it's been piling up." Before Catherine could respond, a commotion from the barn caught their attention. A ranch hand emerged, supporting another who was limping badly. "Boss," the first man called. Parker's horse threw him, ankles swollen something fierce. Henry was off the porch in an instant, striding toward the injured man. Catherine followed without thinking, her years of helping at charity hospitals in Boston taking over. "Let me see," she said, kneeling beside the ranch hand once they'd settled him on a hay bale. The men looked to Henry, who nodded. Catherine gently removed the man's boot and sock, examining the already purple ankle. "It's not broken," she announced after careful palpation. "A bad sprain. He needs to stay off it for at least a week, keep it elevated, and apply cold compresses." The men stared at her in surprise. "My mother served on the board of Massachusetts General Hospital," she explained. "I volunteered there frequently." Henry's expression was unreadable. "Parker, looks like you've got yourself a nurse. Do as Miss Vance says." In the days that followed, Catherine fell into an unexpected routine at the Forrester ranch. Mornings were spent helping Mrs. Wilkins with household tasks, afternoons working through Henry's neglected accounts, and evenings tending to Parker's ankle or reading aloud while Henry and the hands repaired tack or cleaned their equipment. To her surprise, she found ranch life suited her. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Boston, but there was a satisfaction in it that her previous life had lacked. Each night, she fell into bed pleasantly tired rather than socially exhausted. A week after her arrival, Henry drove her into town in his wagon to inquire about the teaching position. Willow Creek had grown since her first miserable night there. What had seemed a dismal, muddy outpost in the rain now appeared a busy, if small, frontier town. A general store, blacksmith, 2 saloons, the hotel, church, and various other businesses lined the main street, with houses scattered behind them. The town council met in the back room of the larger saloon. Catherine waited nervously outside while Henry spoke on her behalf. When he finally emerged, his face gave nothing away. "Well," she asked anxiously. "They want to talk to you themselves," he said, gesturing for her to enter. 4 men sat around a scarred wooden table, regarding her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. One she recognized as the hotel owner who had turned her away. "Miss Vance," began an older man with spectacles. "Mr. Forrester speaks highly of your education and character. We're in need of someone to teach our children." It's not much, 15 students ranging from 5 to 16, and the pay is only $40 a month. That would be more than adequate, Katherine assured him, hope rising. The hotel owner Thompson, she recalled, snorted. We need to know why a woman of your background has come to Willow Creek. This is a respectable town. Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, both from embarrassment and indignation. My background, sir, is that of a well-educated woman who refused to marry a man old enough to be my father, with a reputation for mistreating his wives. My family disowned me for this decision. I came here seeking my aunt, only to discover she had passed away. And now you're living unchaperoned with a bachelor, Thompson pointed out with a disapproving frown. Mrs. Wilkins serves as my chaperone, Katherine retorted. Mr. Forrester has been nothing but a gentleman and a good Samaritan. The spectacled man cleared his throat. What Thompson means to say is that appearances matter for our schoolteacher. The children's parents will be getting an excellent teacher, Henry interrupted, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. Miss Vance speaks multiple languages, understands mathematics and science, and has volunteered in one of the finest hospitals in the country. She's already proving herself useful at my ranch, organizing my accounts and helping with an injured hand. That may be, Thompson persisted, but her living situation is temporary, Katherine interjected. If I were to be offered the position, I would of course seek more appropriate lodgings in town. The council members exchanged glances. The spectacled man who introduced himself as Dr. Wilson spoke again. The school comes with living quarters, small but adequate for a single teacher. You would have your privacy, but be expected to maintain the highest moral standards. Of course, Katherine agreed readily. After more questions about her educational background and teaching philosophy, the council asked her to step outside while they deliberated. She paced anxiously while Henry leaned against the wall, watching her with amusement. You'll wear a hole in the boardwalk, he observed. This is important, she replied. It's my chance to be independent. Something flickered across his face, disappointment. But before she could analyze it, the door opened and Dr. Wilson beckoned them back inside. Miss Vance, we've decided to offer you a 1-month trial as Willow Creek schoolteacher, he announced. If all goes well, we'll extend it to a proper contract. Relief washed over Katherine. Thank you, gentlemen. I promise you won't regret your decision. As they left the saloon, Katherine could barely contain her excitement. I did it, she exclaimed once they were outside. I have a position, a home, a chance to build a life here. Henry smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. You did indeed. Congratulations. They spent the rest of the day purchasing necessities for her new living quarters, Henry insisting on paying for much of it despite her protests. By late afternoon, they had loaded the wagon with a small trunk, bedding, kitchenware, and groceries. We should get back to the ranch, Henry said as they finished. There's a storm brewing. Katherine looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. I thought we would bring my things to the schoolhouse today. Henry shook his head. That storm will hit before we could get you settled. Better to wait until tomorrow. Indeed, by the time they reached the ranch, wind was whipping through the trees and the first heavy drops of rain were falling. They hurried inside just as the skies opened. That evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Katherine found Henry alone in the small study where she'd been organizing his accounts. He stood by the window, watching the storm, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Thank you again for everything you've done, she said softly. He turned, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Just doing what anyone would do. No, Katherine contradicted. Not anyone. Most people wouldn't have given me a second glance that night. Henry took a sip of his whiskey. You'll make a fine teacher. Those children are lucky to have you. I'll miss it here, she admitted, surprised by how much she meant it. I've grown fond of the ranch in such a short time. You're welcome anytime, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Wilkins will miss having another woman around, just Mrs. Wilkins. The question slipped out before Katherine could stop it. Henry's eyes met hers, something vulnerable flashing in their blue depths. "No," he admitted quietly, "not just Mrs. Wilkins." The air between them seemed to thicken. Katherine took a step toward him without conscious thought. "I should get some sleep," she said, though she made no move to leave. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." "Yes," Henry agreed, equally motionless. For a heartbeat, Katherine thought he might say more, might cross the small distance between them. Instead, he nodded and turned back to the window. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Henry," she whispered, retreating from the room with a curious ache in her chest. The following morning dawned clear, but the roads were muddy from the night's deluge, delaying their departure for town. By mid-afternoon, they finally arrived at the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with an attached living space at the rear. Katherine tried to muster enthusiasm as she surveyed her new home, but found herself comparing it unfavorably to the warmth of the Forrester ranch. The teachers' quarters consisted of just two small rooms, a combination sitting room and kitchen, and a bedroom barely large enough for a narrow bed and chest of drawers. "It's not much," Henry observed as they carried in her few possessions. "It's mine," Katherine replied, trying to sound more positive than she felt. "My first real home of my own." They worked in near silence, arranging her things and making the space habitable. When there was nothing left to do, they stood awkwardly in the middle of the sitting room. "Well," Henry said, his hat in his hands, "I suppose you're all set." "Yes," Katherine agreed, looking around at the sparse furnishings. "Thank you for everything," Henry nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "School starts Monday. That gives you 3 days to prepare." "Henry," Katherine began, then faltered, unsure what she wanted to say. He paused at the door. "Yes. Nothing, just thank you again." Something like resignation passed over his features. "Take care of yourself, Katherine." And then he was gone, the sound of his wagon fading as he drove back toward his ranch, leaving Katherine truly alone for the first time in her life. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity as Katherine organized the schoolroom, prepared lessons, and introduced herself to the families of her future pupils. The townspeople were cautiously welcoming, though she noticed some of the women eyeing her suspiciously when she mentioned her brief stay at the Forrester ranch. On Sunday, she attended church, sitting alone near the back. After the service, several families invited her to Sunday dinner, but she declined politely, claiming the need to finalize her lessons for the following day. In truth, she found herself missing the easy companionship she'd experienced at the ranch. Monday arrived with nervous excitement. Katherine stood at the door of the schoolhouse, greeting each child as they arrived. By 9 o'clock, all 15 of her students were seated at their desks, regarding her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. "Good morning," she began. "I am Miss Vance, your new teacher." The first day went better than she'd dared hope. The children were mostly attentive, if somewhat behind in their studies compared to Boston standards. Katherine found herself enjoying the challenge of engaging such a diverse group, from little Sarah Miller, who was just learning her letters, to 16-year-old James Cooper, who showed a genuine aptitude for mathematics. As the weeks passed, Katherine settled into her role as Willow Creek schoolteacher. The town council extended her trial period into a proper contract, and she began to feel accepted by the community. She started a reading circle for the town's women, organized a spelling bee, and even convinced some of the local men to build playground equipment for the schoolyard. But despite her busy schedule and growing circle of acquaintances, Katherine found herself lonely in a way she'd never experienced before. She missed the Forrester ranch, the comfortable evenings by the fire, Mrs. Wilkins' no-nonsense advice, and most of all, Henry's quiet strength and unexpected kindness. She'd seen him only twice since moving to town, once at church, where they'd exchanged brief pleasantries before he was pulled away by another rancher, and once at the general store, where their conversation had been stilted and formal in a way that left her feeling hollow. One Friday afternoon in late May, Nearly 2 months after her arrival in Willow Creek, Katherine dismissed her students early due to the unseasonable heat. As the last child disappeared down the road, she noticed a rider approaching Henry Forrester on his chestnut gelding. Her heart quickened as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. He looked thinner than she remembered, and there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Forrester," she greeted him formally, aware of curious eyes watching from nearby houses. "What brings you to town, Miss Vance?" he returned with equal formality. "I've come about the school accounts. The council asked me to review them with you." Katherine knew this was a pretense. The school accounts were handled directly by Dr. Wilson, but she played along. "Of course. Please come inside." Once within the schoolhouse, with the door closed against prying eyes, Henry's formal demeanor dropped away. He paced the length of the schoolroom while Katherine watched in bewilderment. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked. He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "Are you happy here, Katherine?" The question caught her off guard. Yes, the teaching is rewarding and the town has accepted me." "That's not what I asked," he said softly. "Are you happy?" Katherine found she couldn't lie to him. "I'm content, it's a good life, but not a happy one." "Happiness seems like a luxury I wasn't meant to have," she admitted. "I'm grateful for what I do have: independence, respectable work, a roof over my head." Henry crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just short of touching her. "You deserve more than contentment, Katherine." Her breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "What are you saying, Henry?" "I'm saying I miss you," he confessed, the words seeming to burst from him. "The ranch isn't the same without you. I find myself making excuses to come to town, hoping to catch a glimpse of you." "Henry," she whispered, her heart pounding. "I know it's too soon," he continued. "I know you value your independence, and I would never ask you to give that up, but I can't stop thinking about you." Katherine found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by something stronger than propriety or caution. "I've missed you too, more than I thought possible after knowing someone such a short time." Hope flickered across his face. "I don't want to interfere with the life you're building here, but I had to tell you how I feel before it was too late." "Too late," she echoed, confused. "Richardson's been making his intentions clear," Henry said, naming the town's bachelor lawyer who had indeed been attentive at recent community events. "I couldn't bear the thought of not speaking my mind." A small smile curved Katherine's lips. "Mr. Richardson is a kind man, but I have no interest in his attentions." Relief washed over Henry's features. No, she confirmed. "My thoughts have been elsewhere." They stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Henry cleared his throat. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "People will talk if I stay too long." "Let them talk," Katherine replied with newfound boldness. "I'm tired of living my life according to others' expectations." Henry's smile transformed his face. "Does that mean you might consider visiting the ranch sometime?" "Mrs. Wilkins asks about you constantly." "Just Mrs. Wilkins," Katherine teased, echoing their earlier conversation. "Not just Mrs. Wilkins," he admitted, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. This time, he did what he hadn't done that night in the study. He closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her cheek gently. "May I call on you properly, Katherine Vance?" "I would be disappointed if you didn't, Henry Forrester," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her knees. When he kissed her, it was gentle and brief, but filled with promise. As he pulled away, Katherine knew with sudden certainty that she had found something far more valuable than mere independence. The following Sunday, heads turned when Katherine entered the church on Henry's arm. Whispers followed them as they took their seats, but Katherine found she didn't care. For the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, she felt truly at home. As June bloomed across the Montana territory, Katherine fell into a new routine. Weekdays were devoted to her students, but weekends found her at the Forrester Ranch, helping Mrs. Wilkins in the kitchen, riding across the grasslands with Henry, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Their courtship progressed with a combination of old-world formality and frontier practicality. Henry rode into town several evenings a week, taking Katherine for walks or joining her for supper in her small quarters under Mrs. Wilson's benevolent chaperoning. By mid-July, even the most gossip-prone townspeople had accepted their relationship. Katherine overheard Mrs. Thompson, the hotel owner's wife, telling another woman, "He's been alone too long. About time he found someone with enough spirit to match him." On a sweltering Saturday in late July, Katherine arrived at the ranch to find unusual activity. Several wagons were parked in the yard, and men she didn't recognize were unloading lumber. "What's happening?" she asked Henry as he came to help her down from the buggy Dr. Wilson had lent her. His eyes twinkled with mischief. "I'm making some improvements to the house." Katherine followed him around to the front, where men were measuring and marking the ground extending from the existing porch. "You're expanding the porch?" she asked, puzzled. Henry nodded, suddenly serious. "Do you remember the night we met, what I said to Mrs. Wilkins when I brought you in?" Katherine thought back. "You told her my family had thrown me out in the rain." "And I said something else," he prompted. "Something I meant with all my heart, though I barely knew you then." The memory came to her suddenly. "You said I could stay as long as I needed." "That wasn't it," Henry said softly. "When Mrs. Wilkins asked what would happen to you, I said her family threw her out in the rain." He paused, taking both her hands in his. "And then I said, then I'll build her a porch to wait on." Katherine's eyes widened. "You're building this for me?" "I'm building everything for you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This house, this ranch, my whole life, none of it means anything without you in it." Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Katherine Vance, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything. Will you marry me? Will you make this ranch your home, not as a guest or a friend, but as my wife?" Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes as joy unlike anything she'd ever known welled up within her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Henry Forrester." He rose and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with none of the restraint he'd shown during their courtship. Katherine returned his kiss with equal fervor, oblivious to the whoops and cheers of the workmen. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Wilkins was standing nearby, wiping tears from her eyes with her apron. "About time," she said gruffly. "Now maybe you'll both stop moping when you're apart." Their wedding took place in September after the harvest, but before the first snows. The entire town turned out, even Thompson, who had grudgingly admitted that Katherine was a fine teacher, despite her irregular arrival. Katherine wore a simple white dress ordered from a catalog, with wildflowers in her hair instead of an elaborate veil. Henry stood tall and proud in a new suit, his usual weathered hat replaced by a bowler for the occasion. As they spoke their vows in Willow Creek's small church, Katherine marveled at how much her life had changed in just 6 months. From desperate and alone in the rain to beloved and cherished, standing beside the man who had opened his heart and home to her when she had nothing. The expanded porch was finished just in time for the wedding party, wrapping around the house like welcoming arms. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the guests who had traveled from town to celebrate with them. Later, when the last guest had departed and they stood alone on their porch, Henry wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, both of them gazing up at the star-filled Montana sky. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Katherine leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength that had become her foundation. "More than I ever imagined possible. No regrets, about leaving Boston, about the life you might have had." She turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face. "That wasn't a life, Henry, it was an existence. This you, the ranch, our future together, this is living." He kissed her then, tender and passionate at once. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Welcome home, Katherine Forrester." And as they stood together on the porch he had built for her, Katherine knew she had finally found where she belonged, not in the grand parlors of Boston or even in the schoolroom of Willow Creek, but here, in the arms of a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and offered not judgment but kindness, not charity but partnership. Her family had thrown her out in the rain, but Henry Forrester had built her a home where she would never be alone again.